what's the likelihood Google will be able to leverage its existing monopoly to make a new one?
Um, is it not doing it already?
Joining me again this week is Senior Business Editor at Wired, Natasha Bernow. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
OpenAI is pushing out GPT 5.2 a couple of weeks ahead of schedule after Sam Altman declared code red. I would say arguably in response to Gemini 3 outperforming GPT 5.1. But what do you make of this bringing up of the launch? Do you think it's sort of a smart strategic pivot from OpenAI to sort of get back ahead of the curve, or is it sort of a sign that they're panicking that they no longer have the number one spot?
Well, I mean, it's no coincidence that Sam Altman last week was telling people focus solely on our core product, forget about everything else. We need to focus. And it is, again, no coincidence that Gemini 3 was doing really well. Obviously, we haven't seen GPT 5.2 yet. It, hopefully it will be better than Gemini 3. Otherwise, their efforts will be in vain, right? And it will still. I don't know what goes beyond code red. What's worse than code red? Code black or something. But if it doesn't outperform, at least from the perception of its users, if it doesn't outperform what's already out there, they're going to have a really big problem. So it is a strategic thing. OpenAI has a history of doing strategic releases ahead of the competition or around the competition, and they're able to kind of dominate the narrative and get people interested and make sure that there's a lot of noise and a lot of attention towards their releases. So it would 100% make sense for them to try to control the narrative and retake it after what was perceived as a bit of a stumble, perhaps from some who've been watching this space and looking at all these reports internally of the company being told, forget about everything else. We need to focus on this. We cannot lose market ground.
I mean, one of the things I saw was that 5.2 is supposed to outperform Gemini 3, at least according to their OpenAI's internal tests. But it kind of got me wondering, is comparing benchmarks really the best way to judge success of a model in terms of sort of user uptake? So what do you think about the idea of sort of comparing the user friendliness and the sort of the ease of integration of different AI models into your life as potentially a better way of measuring? I mean, success is maybe a difficult way to sell it, but of the broader sort of success of a model.
Yeah, I think that there are two camps that you have to think about. You have to think about your general consumer and the way they might use LLMs in their day-to-day life, and you think about the business consumer, which is the one that's going to be making the company money ultimately. You've got all those business subscriptions, you've got people who are using it for their work. If you think about those two camps, in my mind, for the first one, the speed, ease of access, the sort of accuracy of result is very, very important, and just the availability of it and the applicability of it to real life scenarios. So having the most up to date information, trying to bridge that gap a little bit with the breaking news side of things, which I know LLMs have struggled with, but being able to give them all the information that they would like to know in their day to day lives without having to go to another platform is kind of the key measure of success in my view for the general consumer. For the business consumer, you're looking at accurate, actionable intelligence, and that is a whole other ball game, right? And it is very difficult to keep that accuracy with the hallucinations that we know happen in every model and that continue to plague the AI industry. It's very, very difficult to kind of reduce that, but I imagine that's really the measure that I picture them and other businesses looking at themselves and saying, like, how well are we performing on that? However, in my view, there is a bit of a competition for speed. Trying to get the answers as quickly as possible seems to be a way of sort of measuring how I suppose, effective and useful it is to users. I believe that's kind of a false narrative, a false equation. You can't, it's about how useful that information is and how accurate that information is. And I think everybody would agree, whether they're consumers or they're using it for businesses, that if they get the best most actionable intelligence from an LLM, that's the best outcome. If they get what they're asking for, even if they have to wait a second longer, it's much better than if you have something that's half cooked that you can't actually rely on, that you can't use at all, whether it's in your life or at work.
I spent some time, I mean, admittedly, with some of my coworkers, not the most representative sort of all use cases, but we have access to ChatGPT, we have access to Gemini, we have
Yeah.
access to Claude. Those are the ones that we have access through the company, and they were most impressed that some of them are ChatGPT subscribers, like personally,
Right.
and they hadn't used Gemini 3 and they used it, and like you say, they were most impressed by the speed. Do you think ChatGPT is maybe falling a bit behind on its user friendliness? Like you say, maybe with the better benchmarks, it is getting better answers,
Hmm.
but many of the people that I was showing it to were like, "Oh, actually, I might try and give Gemini 3 a bit of a look now, so that maybe I've accidentally converted some people now."
That's very funny. No, I think it is interesting, right? I think it does also depend on what you use it for, right? I mean, from what I understand, Gemini 3 is better with images. It's better with sort of, I guess, the way it displays content appeals to a certain type of person. It's kind of, I guess I would call it more aesthetic and less blocky. And so I think, with ChatGPT, you're right. You do have it thinking for an answer for like a beat or two or three. And I guess it depends on the kind of person that you are. And there is a function for GPT-5 where you can put it in sort of the thinking mode, and it will take longer, but the answers will be more allegedly more more accurate. And so and it's better, I suppose. It will have more of a kind of time to percolate what it might think is the best possible answer to give you, and provide that, rather than immediately just sort of scraping and producing something off the bat. I guess with Gemini, and you're right. I mean, I can see why some people find that really appealing. I can see how they would find it appealing in the same way as they would find Google search appealing, and the fact that you don't need to wait at all for a response. You just type it in and immediately stuff will come up. And it's that immediacy that is super attractive to people, because if you're not using it for, I don't know, baseline research, or to answer key questions, or a scenario build for you, or create code that you really need it to get right the first time around, if you're just asking it questions and using it as a pseudo search engine, then it totally makes sense for you not to want to wait around even that 1-2 beat to watch it kind of think about things, because you want that answer straight away. And I think that does certainly appeal to that type of person. Whether there's a large percentage of ChatGPT users that are in that same camp, I don't know. That's the thing. I do get the impression that there is probably a mix, and it's very hard to please everyone. It's almost impossible.
So then, how much of ChatGPT's current success, or I suppose the size of its user base, if we limit it to that, do you think is built on the fact it was the first or and the loudest to the market, rather than, again, if we go back to this user friendliness?
There's like a huge advantage for OpenAI being the sort of first mover. For sure, it has the largest user base in the world, and it quite rightly so was the one that erupted into our lives and showed that generative AI was a huge part of the conversation moving forward in the business world and elsewhere. So yeah, I mean, it does have first mover advantage, and it has taken full advantage of that itself. I think the interesting thing here, though, is kind of what you were saying about your colleagues a minute ago, that people don't have necessarily like a really strong brand affiliation. And so although people might be very aware of ChatGPT, and they might have used ChatGPT even for a couple of years now, it's not necessarily something that they're wedded to, and something that they would like go to battle for and say, no, I've never heard anyone say, oh, I'm a ChatGPT person, I'm not a Gemini person, I'm not a Copilot person. I don't think that people feel so strongly about LLMs in that way. And so I think that there is absolute power in the brand. I feel like it hasn't necessarily translated into our vernacular. So you don't hear people saying, I'm going to chat GPT this or I'm going to chat GPT that. Yet it is possible that it might. And, Google itself has been the subject of that. I'm going to Google this, I'm going to Google that. It's in the dictionary, people know it. And that company is acutely aware of the importance of brand. It does make sense that because there are other competitors out there and a lot of them have huge bench strength in this arena, that OpenAI should be feeling nervous about its position. It's done some very good strategic partnerships, which stand in good stead. It has become in its own right very kind of prominent in the AI sector, and a lot of other businesses have partnered with it. It is difficult, though, to maintain that advantage and to maintain that momentum if you have others that are replicating what you're doing but better. So I think that's where OpenAI really needs to, keep up the momentum, basically, not just be the first mover, but to keep up and set the bench for everyone else, set the standard for the market, and that's where it needs to be.
What do you make of the idea that Google might have the long-term advantage? Because OpenAI is in a position where it has to remain at the top, and if it's not at the top, then it's kind of not nothing. It's obviously got a lot going for it, but that's its identity as being the first and being the best.
Yeah.
But but then Google is, again, going back to this user friendliness, has this sort of the integration with, as you mentioned, the AI summary. It's in your Gmail, which I don't know the user figures for Gmail, but a lot of people use that. I don't know the user figures for every Android phone, but it's in most of them. So that, and I mean, that's putting aside sort of the resources that Google has and the ability to make its own chips that Google is already doing. So what answer does OpenAI really have to that? Does Google have that sort of that longer term ability just to wait out OpenAI essentially?
I mean, it's interesting when you look at the sort of history of these sorts of things, and this is not the first technology that you've seen kind of emerge where very big companies that are big in the space in which this new technology has emerged have tried to dominate the market. And yes, you're right. On paper, Google has a huge advantage. Why? Because it has a lot of resources. It has the biggest repository of information on the internet that it can train its algorithm on. It has a huge repository of videos and imagery that it can also train its algorithms on. It has, you're right, that ecosystem of products, whether it's phone, your business services, your Google Suite, your Gmail. It's got a lot of different levers to pull, and it does make sense that for any other business operating in that space, for them to consider them a very important adversary, I suppose. However, how do I put this? This is not a zero-sum game. Like, it's not like we have to end up with just one business operating in AI and all the other ones will cease to exist and completely fail. That's not necessarily what would happen here. And I do think that although it's important for the likes of OpenAI and Microsoft and all the other competitors in the Magnificent Seven to be watching what Google is doing and be cognizant that they must be competitive, it is not a situation where they have to kill themselves or that their businesses will not survive because Google has decided to release a really good version of Gemini 3. That I don't think that is sufficient to and even like its pedigree and its reach is sufficient to strike fear in the hearts of its competitors to the point where they give up completely and they go, right, that's it, I'm not entering this race any longer. So I would say that as one side. And secondly, Google has a unique position that others in this space don't suffer from, which is that it is hugely in the crosshairs of a lot of regulators because of its power and its reach, and the fact that it is considered by many regulators to be anti-competitive, and that the way it has been behaving to try to get that competitive advantage over everybody else and to try to as regulators have alleged, perceived to be penalizing people for not playing by their rules. That's something that the likes of OpenAI haven't faced yet. They're not in that situation where they're so I suppose omnipotent in a space that they would find themselves faced with such scrutiny and with potential fines and breakups, threatened all the time. And so I think, it's very difficult to say, oh yes, long-term advantage is definitely Google's and not anybody else's, because Google has all of these other things that all these other strings to its bow. I think it's not as simple as all of that as all of that at all. But I would say that it is true that when it comes to building a product, the more information, especially with AI and LLMs, the more information that you have, the better it becomes, and it is far harder to build something from scratch, and having to strike all these different partnerships with publishers and strike all these different partnerships with AI scrapers, to generate all this data, versus having access to everything at your fingertips and having it in the T&Cs of all of the products that you offer, that you will be allowing Google to scrape it. Of course, there's an advantage there, and that is undeniable.
It's worth mentioning that OpenAI is looking to move into the hardware space, but I
Yeah.
think that's a long way off being anything you could hold or run power through at the very least. Um, so I just want to go back to that sort of that. There's probably the best way to put it is the monopoly that Google already has on the internet, and whether or not it could use that to leverage a new monopoly on the sort of the AI version of the internet.
Mhm.
And something interesting I saw first time I saw it was reported in Wired was that Google's has access to 3 to 5 times more internet data than any other AI developer.
Yeah.
Do you think that is part of the sort of the secret source of Google's or Gemini 3's success?
Yes, I do. I do, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely, I mean, yes, it's fact. It's something that, Google has not hidden. It's something that makes total sense, for them to have been able to leverage. And I think, AI overviews is also helping to feed into Gemini. It's all connected. The way that people behave online and the data and the information that they're looking for is absolutely helping, to inform the new products that Google comes out with. I think it's interesting though, when you look at some of the stuff on like YouTube's terms of service. It has like, basically some things that say, oh, Google may scrape, information that YouTube's commitment, to responsible AI development, includes, making sure the creators are aware that if they post some things on the site, that they might partner with AI companies to help generate, some AI technology, and that, that there's certain rights that people have to this content, versus other content. It's very gnarly. But yes, it's 100% an advantage, for them to be able to not just leverage the huge amount of information of people's searches online and the way that they respond to AI overview and the feedback that they provide to that outside of Gemini 3, but also just the plethora of images and videos that they're able to access through YouTube is a huge, huge advantage to developing a really, really intuitive product.
Am I right in thinking that some of the way they're getting uh, this access, this significant amount of extra access to websites, is through essentially withholding indexing of websites if they opt out of, um, for lack of a better way of putting it, being scraped by Google's AI scrapers?
Yeah, so that's what it's been accused, of doing. So there was a report from Press Gazette recently that showed that, basically Google had considered allowing publishers to opt out of their data being used, but then described it as a hard red line. And they basically looked at documents that were disclosed as part of an antitrust trial in the US, which revealed that the tech giant preferred not to give publishers the option of opting out, as it was evolving into a space for monetization. And so, essentially, it said to publishers were accusing it of saying either you play ball or we will de-index you, which means essentially that they would not appear at the top of the Google search engine, which, for anybody who's in this space, and I'm sure our listeners will also be aware, if you don't appear on the first page of Google, it's hugely damaging to your traffic, and it can have huge impact on businesses. And so it matters a lot to all these businesses to appear as high as they possibly can on search indexes. And certainly with AI overview appearing at the very top of the page, that has impacted, also the kind of behavior that people have, because they'll find the answer right there, or what they think is the answer, and there might be a link to something, but they might not click on it. And so traffic has certainly gone down. Publishers have complained about traffic going down from their sites because Google has been scraping their information and displaying it at the top, and therefore people aren't clicking through to their pages. And they're also complaining about, yeah, just that feeling of either we allow you to do this, bearing in mind that the bottom is dropping off of our Google search and people are not accessing our articles or our media, or we're not pairing at all. So that both choices are pretty hard. And where the judge in the US ruled that Google has an illegal search monopoly, and the remedies trial will be held to decide what, if anything, should be done about that. But a really interesting, tough stance that Google decided to make, and it is due to money.
There is I think, an investigation launched by the European Union that their antitrust body is going to be essentially looking into what we just spoke about, the sort of the de-indexing and the withholding, maybe you could say, of YouTube's wealth of data. Essentially, they're the only ones that can train their AI off it. Do you see that investigation really having any consequences on this sort of monopoly that Google has built? Because if it's a monetary fine, that's, I mean, essentially not going to do anything. But do they really have the power to make Google give access to the data that they're using, to open up YouTube, to allow other companies access to their de-indexed content, all that kind of stuff? Do they have that
Yeah.
power?
It's tricky, right? Because this is the second investigation that the European Commission has launched in less than a month, into Google and big tech. And so it shows just how concerned the EU is over the rights of publishers and the way that these companies are operating, especially Google. It's heavily politicized, though. So at the moment, the US stance from the US government is that the EU is being very stringent and overreaching with its regulations, that it is being too harsh to big tech companies, and that it is becoming hard to operate here. And so the hope is certainly that there'll be a loosening, I suppose, of EU regulation towards big tech under this climate, and that they'll be a bit more tolerant and less, I suppose, attacking based on their behavior. However, this could be something that could escalate tensions between the EU and the US. It could certainly, absolutely end in a big fine for Google, which you and I both agree is kind of maybe perceived by the company and other companies as the cost of doing business, and certainly doesn't necessarily come hand in hand with like a change in behavior or a forced change in behavior. However, there are certainly new powers that the EU has to force companies to, as you say, unlock the secrets of things and force them to disclose certain things that companies might not want to do. And that is something that could definitely come should they find that it's necessary in order to achieve a more competitive landscape. And so I think the EU has said that it's concerned that Google may be using publishers' online content for the AI summaries known as AI overviews on search, the thing that appears at the top, without compensating them adequately and not giving them the option to refuse. And so it also expressed concern over some YouTube videos that were uploaded by users, that they said that it might be possible that people didn't understand that their content could be used to form AI and almost be the fodder to train AI. And so, that's the determination at the moment. This investigation could take a long time. These things do take a long time. There's a lot of evidence gathering. It could take a couple of years. However, the powers they have, it very much might force Google to change the way that it functions in Europe, and to stop scraping information, or to stop, I suppose, any perception of lack of knowledge or consent to scrape that data for AI. So become a lot clearer in the way that it approaches things if the EU deems that necessary. And I think it's interesting because Google obviously rejected the claims from publishers that this was happening. It's been very staunch in its response, saying that this is not something that it believes it's been acting unfairly in doing. And so we'll see how that goes. But it will take a while. And I think from a lot of people in the industry, the damage will have been done if that's their perspective. If they strongly believe that, in the argument that, Google is doing something that it shouldn't be doing and scraping, people's information without their knowledge, or saying they must play with AI or pay the consequences, then if that is truly what's happening right now, and the EU finds that that is the case, the damage might already be done, and it might be too late to do anything about it. You can't just retrospectively erase, scraping. You can't just say, I'm going to, make you delete everything that you may or may not have scraped. That's not something necessarily that could be realistic. And so the stuff that's building LLMs at the moment, the scraping the information out there, it's being used at the moment. So I think that's the big challenge, that you've got very slow wheels in motion from the EU. And in the meantime, the world is going on, and it's going faster than ever, and it's scraping more and more. And the beast of AI needs to be fed, and it might be too late to do anything about it by the time they get around to it, if that's what they decide to do.
There is a saying, I'm probably going to butcher it, but it's regulation always comes after or is slower than innovation, or something like that, right?
Yes, that's right.
Um,
At least 2 years slower than innovation.
well,
If
yeah,
not
2 years at the very least.
sooner.
So just finally, do you think Google, what's the likelihood Google will be able to leverage its existing monopoly to make a new one?
Um, is it not doing it already? Like,
I,
I would,
I mean, maybe.
look, I would say, it's obviously, as I said before, just another string to its bow. I think it would be, it's completely short-sighted if Google did not try to dominate in AI. Absolutely short-sighted, and it totally makes sense to be able to cross-sell a whole suite of things. It's savvy from Google's part. The question is, for me, can it keep up? I think it's had a really good stroke of luck with Gemini 3. I think it's had a really good response. But other people have had good responses in the past, and this is a very, very quick, fast changing, fast moving sector. You're only as good as your last release. And, I'm intrigued when GPT 5.2 comes out. What will Google's response be to that? Because now they've put their hat in the ring. They've thrown down the gauntlet. Now that it's about what do they respond to bring it up to the next level? Because Google is not immune to that. And they need to also be competitive, and they need to also be offering something that's better than anyone else. And I'm intrigued as to how they will do that.
Well, on that note, Natasha Bernal, thank you for taking the time.
Thank you for having me.